It was near the end of 2018 when Hersheypark announced their new park entrance upgrade. In those plans was a hypercoaster by B&M, which puzzled many of us. Hersheypark already had a hypercoaster with Skyrush, which would only be a couple hundred feet away from this new attraction. Skyrush at the time was considered to be one of the best coasters on the planet, boasting its incredible airtime moments. Well, B&M hypers were nothing new and also somewhat predictable. Regardless though, the park moved forward with their plans and opened Candymonium in the summer of 2020. Now that it's been 2 years, or 3 coaster seasons of riding Candymonium and Skyrush, I thought it would be fun to compare these two hypercoasters and see which one will come out on top. Ride stats. Looking over the ride stats, we see that Candymonium beats out Skyrush in 3 out of the 4 subcategories. Candymonium may be taller, faster, and longer, but Skyrush still has the steepest first drop at 85 degrees. This is actually one of the steepest drops on a hypercoaster. Since each subcategory is considered to be a half point, Candymonium earns 1.5 points, while Skyrush gets a half point. As always with all of my other coaster duels, the remaining categories are all worth 1 point. Theming and presentation. Though it has no theming, Skyrush is still a pretty neat coaster to look at. First, it's the giant first drop, the unique arch support that is kind of like a mini St. Louis arch. Next, majority of the roller coaster takes place over a body of water. I'm not sure if they really adds a ton to the ride experience, but it does make this section of the park look nice, almost like a sophisticated steel structure surrounding a small water fountain in the pond of sorts. Candymonium is a roller coaster themed to candy, and because we're at Hersheypark, this theming makes sense. Honestly though, there really isn't much theming beyond the station, sign, and terrain designs. It's neat to look at, but also, I know that some do not like the color scheme of the track. The brown track isn't the prettiest to look at, even if it's supposed to resemble chocolate. Finally, we have the giant Hershey Kiss fountain that the roller coaster wraps around near the end of the ride. It's a pretty neat looking fountain and serves well as a nice centerpiece for the park entrance. Comparing between these two roller coasters, I say that Candymonium walks away with a slight advantage. Also, the surrounding foliage is still growing in, so Candymonium will continue to look better in the years to come. The lift. Normally I wouldn't discuss the lift, but since Skyrush has a fast-moving cable lift, this topic had to be brought up. Candymonium features a more traditional chain lift, and being built by B&M, it's a pretty fast lift, but nowhere near the speeds experienced on Skyrush. The cable lift will pull you about 26 feet per second, which is just shy of 18 miles per hour. This will get you to the top of the hill in about 10 seconds. Skyrush is going to earn this point. The view. This may be one of the weirder categories, but since it has been featured in every single duel, why stop here? Both roller coasters feature a vertical height at or about 200 feet, so you know the view is going to be great. The only reason I'm going to move this point on over to Candymonium is, well, you get to spend a couple more seconds soaking in the panoramic views of Hershey. While Skyrush, that ride pulls you to the top of that drop so fast, you don't have a spare second to look around. First drop. I'm a huge fan of the first drop found on Candymonium. If you are seated in the back row, riders will experience a nice long dose of airtime. It's not super intense, but plain old fun. With that said, it still doesn't compare to the first drop found on Skyrush. This has to be one of the most intense first drops on a hypercoaster. If you are in the back row, this coaster yanks you over the hill, smacking you with insane ejector airtime. I have talked about this story in the past, but during many of my rides on Skyrush, I thought I was going to be catapulted out of my seat. Usually I'm riding with my hands up, but this time I was holding on in terror. Once you reach the bottom of the drop, the strong positive G-forces kick in, clamping down on your restraint, beginning the journey of thigh crush. But that's for a later topic. Skyrush gets this point. Airtime. This has to be one of the toughest categories to rank. On one hand, we have Skyrush, a roller coaster that has some of the most intense moments of airtime found on any roller coaster. Candymonium, though not as intense, provides longer, sustained moments of airtime. If we were to break down every moment of airtime, Skyrush has about 6 moments of airtime. Candymonium, I counted a total of 7. However, those 2 final moments are on the weaker side because of those final trim breaks. This one kind of comes down to preference. If you love solid floater airtime, then Candymonium would be the winner in this category. If you prefer ultra intense airtime, you couldn't do any better than Skyrush. With that said, I'm still going to give this point over to Skyrush because of one main thing. Regardless if you're in the back, middle, or the front of the train, most of the airtime moments on Skyrush deliver. If you find yourself anywhere else besides the back of the train on Candymonium, you will have a mixed experience. Honestly, even if you are in the back of the train, it's still mixed. The front gets a little airtime during the first drop, and it kind of reverses during that final airtime hill. Back gets nothing, and the front will get a little more floater. Ride intensity. Do I even need to break down this category? We all know that Skyrush is the more intense of the two coasters. This category alone is probably what justified the park in building a second hypercoaster, because it feels rather redundant to have Skyrush than for your next major coaster build another hypercoaster. Not only does Skyrush have crazy intense airtime, there are a couple spots of bone-crushing G-forces. Candymonium, though not exactly a slouch in this category, you can gray out during that upward spiral, but yeah, it's nowhere near as intense as Skyrush. Candymonium I would consider more like a graceful hypercoaster. Skyrush earns this point. Ride smoothness. So with all the praises that I've been giving Skyrush with its airtime, intensity, first drop, there is one aspect to this ride that falls flat, and it's smoothness. Skyrush has a notable rattle that pops up at various points during the ride. Depending on where you are seated will make this rattle more or less intense. It's never been a deterring factor for me, but it's clearly not as smooth as this coaster should be. Candymonium is basically a glossy, smooth coaster. It may suffer from the occasional rattle here or there, but doesn't come close to how rough Skyrush can get. Candymonium easily wins this point. The restraints. You cannot talk about Skyrush without bringing up its notoriously bad restraints. The ride has been nicknamed Thigh Crush by many enthusiasts because the lap bars literally crush your thighs. Because of the intense nature of Skyrush, the lap bars continue to ratchet tighter against the lap until you are seated on the brake run with the lap bar so tight your legs feel like they could go numb. Now, prior to entering the station, the lap bars do release a little tension, making that weight on the brake run a little bit more bearable. Candymonium features the famous clamshell restraints by B&M. These are amongst the most comfy restraints on a roller coaster, so yeah, Candymonium earns this point. Now let's move on over to a bonus point. There is one aspect between these two roller coasters that has to be discussed. Skyrush features these unique wing seats. They sit out over the side of the track, meaning there is nothing underneath you. These wing seats really enhance the whole ride experience and are my favorite place to ride Skyrush. Skyrush is the only wing seat designed hypercoaster here in North America, thus worth the mention, earning Skyrush another point. Alright, the final tally comes to Candymonium with 5.5 points, and Skyrush with 5.5 points, making this a tie. Not the outcome I was expecting. Both roller coasters are great in their own merits, however, I do feel that Skyrush has the stronger fan base than Candymonium. Many would consider Candymonium to be the run-of-the-mill hypercoaster by B&M, which I agree with and disagree with all at the same time. Honestly though, a run-of-the-mill hypercoaster by B&M is usually better than your average roller coaster. But anyways, both coasters have their merits, which is why two hypercoasters are able to function well at the same park. Both roller coasters feel like different experiences, which is a good thing. If it were up to me, I would go with Candymonium because, well, as I discovered this year, I am a huge B&M Hyper/Giga Coaster fanboy. These are amongst my favorite types of coasters. Skyrush, well, it used to be my favorite coaster for a short period of time, but with every re-ride, the coaster continues to fall in ranking. The positives continue to diminish as the negatives take up more of the limelight. It's still a great coaster, no doubt, but I start to wonder how much more life is left in this crazy, out-of-control hypercoaster. Well, that does it for today's Coaster Duel. Which ride do you think is better? Let me know down in the comments. Please don't forget to click on that like button, and if you are new to my channel, subscribe. That way you won't miss out on more great content coming your way by Xtreme Thrills.